The wind had finally died down. It was just past midnight, and a crescent moon cast soft shadows across the field. I was polishing my boots after a long day, midweek patrols, town meetings, and then chores back at the ranch. As police chief, I like to switch roles quickly, from law enforcer to rancher. By 9 o'clock, I was done for the day. But tonight, I wasn't feeling as relaxed as usual. Something didn't sit right. Maybe it was the way the darkness felt a bit too quiet. Maybe it was the sensitive equipment stored in my safe. Backup hard drives with digital evidence, firearms documentation, and personal keepsakes. All things a curious neighbor shouldn't touch. I slipped out to the barn, the safe tucked into a corner where Clara, my wife, kept tools and ranch records. I'd mounted a basic alarm on it, something to alert me if the door was jiggled or the wheels turned too long. Midnight, I pressed my ear against the barn door. Nothing. Then, quiet at first, but insistent, the soft metallic grind of a wheelbarrow edge scraping across the concrete floor, followed by a low mechanical clicking at the base of the safe. I froze. Someone was inside my barn, on my property, where I store things that are mine alone. I grabbed my flashlight and service radio. Adrenaline kicked in. Whatever this was, I wasn't letting it continue. I crept inside, switching on the overhead lights. The beam caught the silhouette of a woman crouching in front of the safe, her hands probing the latch. She froze when the lights popped on, wide-eyed, breathing fast. Not just any neighbor. HOA Karen, Shauna McBride. Always the one to scold others for leaving grass clippings on the curb or hanging solar lights after dusk. But break into my property. That was a new tactic. She raised her hands slowly, surprise and fear on her face. Chief, I thought you locked the gate on the community water line. I narrowed my eyes. You thought I locked the community water line by trying to open my safe? Her eyes darted away. She stumbled over her words. I heard rumors you were hiding something that could affect the neighborhood. I cut her off. By breaking in? Her voice trembled. It was dark. I thought I heard movement. I thought I had a right to check. I clicked on my radio. Quietly. Dispatch, code 4. Intrusion. Clear. Within minutes, another unit was outside securing the area, while I escorted Karen to the porch to calm her. Neighbors peered out from behind curtains, some stunned, some nodding in approval of the response. The irony wasn't lost on me. An HOA member breaking into the police chief's barn at midnight and then calling 911 on herself. That's where this story starts. Not with a chain or a water valve, but with a lock, a safe, and a homeowner who decided authority meant access. Authorities would soon be called in, not to enforce HOA rules, but to protect legal rights, thresholds, and private property. And Karen, she was about to learn that some things aren't negotiable. As the squad car pulled away with Karen inside, not under arrest, but definitely being escorted for questioning, the ranch finally returned to stillness. But only for a moment. Because not 5 minutes after being asked to wait for the responding officers to debrief, Karen did the most unexpected thing. She called 911 from the back seat of a patrol car. Through the crack in my kitchen window, I heard her voice, high-pitched, frantic, and unmistakably self-righteous, echoing from the police radio on my deputy's shoulder. Yes, hello, I need help. I'm being detained by some man on his property, and I think he's hiding evidence in a safe. This could be a community threat. The dispatcher, seasoned and unshaken, responded, Ma'am, you're in the presence of 2 uniformed officers and the police chief himself. Can you clarify the emergency? Karen fumbled. Well, yes, but he's trying to intimidate me. He's hiding things from the HOA. He shut off the water valve last month, and now he's locking things away from us. I think, I think this is abuse of power." My deputy, leaning against the hood of the cruiser, exchanged a look with me that said it all. Here we go again. Clara, who'd come outside with a blanket and cup of tea like it was just another ranch night, muttered under her breath, "She's calling 911 on her own arrest?" I shook my head. "No arrest, not yet. Let's see how deep she wants to dig this hole." Eventually, Karen hung up, realizing no cavalry was coming. But the damage was done, not to me, but to her credibility. See, in our small town, false 911 calls aren't taken lightly. They drain resources, risk lives, and show a blatant disregard for public service. Karen hadn't been harmed. She hadn't been threatened. She'd trespassed and attempted to open a private safe, and now, trying to twist the story to suit her fantasy, she was escalating the issue. Back at the precinct the next morning, our phones lit up with calls, not from other officers, but from neighbors. Word traveled fast in Silver Creek Estates, and within hours, Karen's late-night emergency had turned into the latest topic on every local forum, front porch, and feed. Some people were furious, others found it comical. "She called 911 while sitting in a cop car," one neighbor posted. "What was she trying to report? Herself?" Others were less amused. A few longtime HOA loyalists sent emails defending Karen. One called my conduct retaliatory and accused me of failing to respect the chain of community governance. That part made me laugh. As police chief, I respected all lawful authority, but the HOA didn't govern anyone. It wasn't a law enforcement agency. It didn't get to override private property rights, especially not under cover of night. Still, I knew this incident was far from over. That evening, Ronald Spears, HOA president, and loyal Karen Alley requested an urgent meeting at his office. He claimed the HOA board was alarmed by the previous night's events and needed clarification. Clarification? I thought. She broke into my barn, tampered with a safe, called 911, and now I need to clarify? But I agreed. Because I wasn't just protecting my home, I was protecting the principle that no one, not even a noisy neighbor with a clipboard and a clipboard cult, gets to bend the law to fit their ego. As I prepared for the upcoming meeting with the HOA board, I knew this was more than a misunderstanding. It was the beginning of a larger battle, one that would test the limits of authority, civility, and neighborly boundaries. And Karen, she just declared war on the wrong ranch. By the time I walked into the HOA clubhouse the following evening, the air was already thick with tension. Karen wasn't there. Unsurprisingly, she'd claimed she was too emotionally distressed to attend. But the rest of the board had assembled. Ronald Spears at the head of the table, flanked by his ever-silent vice chair and a handful of concerned-looking residents. They didn't waste time. "Chief Reynolds," Ronald began, tapping his pen with exaggerated patience. "We appreciate you agreeing to this emergency meeting. As you're aware, there's been concern about recent events involving HOA member Mrs. McBride." I nodded. "Yes, I'm well aware. I found her attempting to open my private safe in the middle of the night, on my ranch, without my permission. You may call that a concern. I call it criminal trespassing." A few gasps fluttered around the room. Ronald's jaw twitched. "We're not here to argue the legality," he said. "We're here to address the perception of misuse of authority. There are claims you've used your position as police chief to intimidate residents." There it was. The shift. Suddenly, I wasn't the homeowner defending his rights. I was the villain. I leaned forward, calm and deliberate. Let me be absolutely clear. I did not brandish a weapon, I did not threaten anyone, and I did not detain Karen unlawfully. If anything, I exercised more restraint than most would. She was found tampering with a secure safe. on my property. In the dead of night, one of the board members, an elderly woman named Martha, cleared her throat. Karen told us she believed the safe contained something dangerous. She said you'd refused multiple requests for inspection. I paused. You mean HOA requests to inspect my private property inside my barn, beyond the HOA's jurisdiction? Martha shifted in her seat. She wasn't used to pushback. Ronald straightened up, adopting his favorite power stance, hands folded, slight lean forward. Chief, you live in a community governed by shared values. We expect participation in oversight. I gave a tight smile. Oversight, sure. Surveillance? Number. You can't demand entry into someone's private storage on a hunch. This isn't a TV drama. It's real life. And in real life, you need probable cause and a warrant. There was silence. A few board members exchanged uncertain glances. Ronald tried to recover. Let's be reasonable. Perhaps if you gave us transparency, we wouldn't be in this situation. I raised a brow. Ronald, I've filed every required compliance form, attended every HOA meeting when asked, and contributed to neighborhood security efforts. What more transparency do you need? My combination code? That got a chuckle from the back row. Even a few board members couldn't hide a grin. Seeing his grip slip, Ronald shifted tone. Look, we're not here to escalate. We just want to prevent further incidents. Karen feels unsafe. She called 911 on herself, I said dryly. You don't feel unsafe when you're committing a break-in. You feel bold. She gambled. She lost. That's not on me. At that point, the meeting could have gone either way. But then something unexpected happened. One of the newer board members, a young woman named Tasha, spoke up. Honestly, I think this has gone too far, she said. I read the bylaws again last night. We're not entitled to inspect the inside of anyone's private structure unless there's visible hazard, and even then we have to give written notice. That landed like a stone in a pond. The ripples were instant. Ronald turned red. We're here to ensure safety. Tasha cut in. And we're crossing lines we shouldn't. I'm not okay with that. Others murmured in agreement. I stood. Then we're done here. I've said my piece. If Karen or anyone else wishes to pursue this legally, they're welcome to. I'll cooperate fully, as I always do. But until then, I expect the same respect for boundaries I give everyone else. And just like that, the spotlight shifted. I wasn't the one under fire anymore. The HOA was. The morning after the HOA meeting, I sat on my porch, sipping black coffee, staring out across the pasture. The horses were grazing lazily. The air smelled of mesquite and dew, and for a brief moment, things felt normal again. But the peace was temporary. By 9 a.m., my inbox was flooded with emails from HOA members, a message from the city council liaison, and a forwarded HOA bulletin titled Community Security and Concerns Regarding Private Storage Units. They had actually published it. The bulletin vaguely warned of unregistered storage spaces on private property and potential hazards not visible to the public eye. It ended with a note that the HOA may explore broader inspection authority in the near future. I almost spit out my coffee. They were now making a public safety issue out of my safe, not because they had any actual knowledge of its contents, but because Karen had tried to break into it, got caught, and then cried wolf. I forwarded the bulletin to the city attorney, adding only 2 words. Getting bolder? The response came back within an hour. Definitely overreaching. Call if you need to escalate. I didn't respond. Not yet. Instead, I walked out to the barn, unlocked the door, and stood in front of the infamous safe. It wasn't even that big, about 4 feet tall, fireproof, bolted to the floor, and registered legally for firearms and sensitive personal files. It was well within the county guidelines and absolutely outside the HOA's authority. But that didn't stop them from treating it like a WMD. I knew how these things worked. The HOA couldn't force their way in, so they'd take the passive-aggressive route. Community pressure, ambiguous newsletters, and informal inspections. They'd try to turn the neighborhood against me, or at least make enough noise to justify their agenda. But they had underestimated one thing. I knew the rules better than they did. As police chief, I dealt with everything from petty neighborhood disputes to full-blown criminal investigations. I'd written affidavits, executed warrants, and testified in court. I knew exactly what reasonable suspicion meant and how far from it they were. So I drafted a response. It wasn't angry, it wasn't dramatic, it was surgical. To the board of Silver Creek Estates, HOA regulations do not supersede county, state, or federal law. No HOA policy grants authority to access, inspect, or regulate privately secured storage units inside detached residential structures unless a code violation or safety hazard is observed and documented. I have reviewed our covenant agreement. Nowhere does it authorize unannounced entry, anonymous inspections, or speculative claims to property access. Let me be clear. My property is in full compliance with local law. Any further attempt to trespass or incite unauthorized access will be treated as a criminal act. This is not a debate. It is a matter of law. Chief A. Reynolds. I CC'd the city council, the sheriff, and the HOA's legal advisor. It didn't take long for the message to circulate. That afternoon, I ran into my neighbor Pete at the feed store. He clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Heard your safe's now more famous than the town water tower. Good on you for standing your ground." Others started reaching out too. Homeowners who had quietly endured HOA harassment for years finally felt emboldened. They began speaking up, attending meetings, and asking hard questions about what the HOA was really entitled to do. That safe, just a steel box with some files and old photos, had become a symbol, not of defiance, but of boundaries, of privacy, of a line that the HOA couldn't cross no matter how many bulletins they printed or how loud Karen screamed. They wanted to rattle my door. They'd find it locked and backed by the law. The dust from the safe incident had barely settled, but it was clear something had shifted in the neighborhood. Normally, Silver Creek Estates was quiet. Too quiet, if you asked me. But after the bulletin, my formal response, and Karen's late-night antics, people started talking. For the first time in years, the HOA didn't control the conversation. Neighbors began stopping by the ranch, some out of curiosity, others out of solidarity. One afternoon, as Clara and I were tending to the garden, we noticed a slow stream of residents making their way up the drive. At first, I thought it was another impromptu HOA visit. But no, these were just regular folks, people I'd shared barbecues with, helped with fence repairs, or waved to from the patrol car. They weren't here to pry. They were here to ask questions. Real ones. Is it true Karen tried to open your safe? Why's the HOA acting like we're living under martial law? What happens if they come after my property next? That last one stuck with me. I realized then that what happened with my safe had struck a deeper chord in the community. It wasn't just about Karen or even the board. It was about power, overreach, the silent fear many homeowners carried, that one day they'd wake up and find a violation notice taped to their door over a flower bed or a flagpole. So, we did something about it. Clara suggested we host a community meeting at the ranch. No agendas, no board. Just neighbors talking to neighbors. We set up chairs in the barn, brewed coffee, and baked a few trays of Clara's famous honey cornbread. I half expected a handful to show. Over 40 came. People who hadn't spoken at HOA meetings in years stood up to share stories. Stories about unannounced yard inspections, arbitrary fines, and subtle intimidation from board members. One man, Harold, from Lot 18, described being fined for painting his mailbox the wrong shade of green. Another woman, recently widowed, said she was cited for not trimming her hedges on time after a family emergency. It was like a dam breaking. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't come at it like a cop. I came at it like a neighbor. I didn't start this, I said. I didn't ask for Karen to sneak onto my property. I didn't volunteer to be the center of HOA gossip. But I'm not going to sit quietly while they twist the rules and intimidate good people. This safe incident, this wasn't about a locked box. It was about them seeing how far they could go. And folks, they went too far. Applause. Someone suggested forming a resident oversight committee, not to oppose the HOA, but to balance it. Someone else offered to speak to a local attorney about the HOA's overreach. Within an hour, what began as an informal meetup turned into something bigger, the beginning of a real pushback, a movement, not angry or vindictive, but organized, informed, and rooted in respect for people's rights. Clara caught my eye and gave a small nod. She knew what this meant. We weren't just defending a safe anymore. We were defending the idea that no title, president, chairman, or Karen, gives someone the right to violate your home, your dignity, or your peace. As folks lingered, chatting under the barn lights, I felt something I hadn't in weeks. Unity. The HOA wanted control, but now the community wanted something else, accountability. And this time they had each other's backs. It didn't take long for the HOA board to catch wind of the barn meeting. Less than 48 hours later, Ronald Spears and two board members, clipboard warriors in polo shirts, rolled up to my ranch in their spotless SUV just as the sun began to dip behind the oaks. They didn't call ahead. They didn't knock. They parked right outside the main gate. I watched from the porch, arms folded. Clara stood behind me, drying her hands on a dish towel and muttering, "Let me guess. Another wellness check on your safe?" I took a deep breath and walked down the gravel path to meet them. Ronald waved with forced cheer. "Evening, Chief Reynolds," he said with the tone of someone pretending this was just a neighborly chat. I didn't return the smile. "Evening. Didn't expect company." "We were hoping to speak with you," he said, stepping just close enough to toe the line of my property boundary. "There are still a number of unresolved concerns about your, storage unit." "You mean the safe?" "Call it what you like. The board has been receiving inquiries. People want transparency." "Funny," I said, "because the people I heard from recently seem to want the exact opposite, from you." Ronald's jaw tightened. One of the other board members, Tom, spoke up. "Look, this doesn't need to be hostile. We're just here to perform a visual inspection." I held up a hand. "Stop right there. You have no authority to conduct any inspection on my property. None. Not visual, not verbal, not imaginary." Ronald puffed up. "As the HOA board, we have the right to ensure community safety. And I have the right to secure my property from trespassers, including self-appointed safety patrols." The standoff at the gate felt symbolic. Behind me stretched acres of pasture, barns, fences, and buildings I'd built with my own two hands. Behind them was a stack of bylaws and a power trip. "This is overreach," I said, voice even. "You've allowed a resident to sneak into my barn, tamper with my safe, and then publicly accuse me of hiding something dangerous, with zero evidence. Now you're escalating by showing up uninvited." Number, this ends here. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Ronald dropped the act. You're not just a resident, you're law enforcement. It's intimidating to some people. I laughed. Only to people doing something wrong. That landed. The silence after that was heavier than before. Finally, Tom mumbled something about needing to reassess their approach and turned back toward the SUV. Ronald followed, casting one last look at the gate. You'll hear from the board. I expect I will, I said. Make sure it's in writing. As they drove off, Clara came down the steps with a beer and handed it to me without a word. We stood there for a minute, just looking at the gate. That's the last time they show up without knocking, I said. She smiled. They knocked. You just didn't open the door. That night, I installed a motion-triggered camera by the gate and reinforced the lock on the barn. Not because I feared more break-ins, but because I knew when people lose an argument, they often try to take it in the dark. But I wasn't hiding, and I wasn't backing down. This wasn't about fences or safes anymore. It was about a gate, a line between power and principle, and who had the right to cross it. And from where I stood, it was my line to draw. The next morning, I got a certified letter in the mail, stamped with the HOA's official seal and delivered with an air of self-importance. It was clearly intended to intimidate. Clara rolled her eyes as I sliced it open with my pocket knife over the kitchen table. Inside, 4 typed pages of legalese, highlighted phrases, and the crown jewel, a formal request for voluntary inspection of potentially non-compliant private storage equipment. The safe again. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was desperate. They were reaching, grasping at anything that could justify Karen's behavior and cover the board's tracks. The letter cited obscure provisions from a supplemental neighborhood handbook, one that had never been officially adopted and had no binding legal status. At the bottom was a bolded warning: failure to comply may result in escalating enforcement measures. It was unsigned. Typical. I called our city attorney, Dana Morales, and read the letter aloud to her over speakerphone. She didn't even wait until I was finished. They're bluffing, she said flatly. There's nothing enforceable there, and if they try to act on it, they're in serious legal risk. Can I respond? I asked. She chuckled. Oh, I'm counting on it. And respond I did. That afternoon, I sent a letter back to the HOA, this time through official channels, not just as a homeowner, but as a sworn law enforcement officer. To the Silver Creek Estates Homeowners Association Board, this letter serves as formal notice that any attempt to access my private property without consent will be treated as criminal trespass. Your reference to a non-binding handbook has no legal weight. Further, this letter, your previous bulletin, and Karen McBride's actions have been forwarded to our city attorney for review under statutes related to harassment, false claims, and misuse of administrative authority. Consider this your final warning. Chief A. Reynolds. I didn't need to wait long for a response. 2 days later, a rumor spread like wildfire through the neighborhood. Karen had hired a lawyer. The same Karen who broke into my barn. The same Karen who dialed 911 on herself. Now she was lawyering up. But something about that didn't track. So I did some quiet digging. Through a friend at the courthouse, I learned there hadn't been any official filings against me. No civil complaints, no restraining orders. Nothing. In fact, Karen's lawyer wasn't even a real litigator, just a distant cousin of hers who ran a tax consultancy in a different county. So what was she doing? The answer came during a surprise HOA meeting. Karen appeared, nervous, shaky, but rehearsed. She took the floor and accused me of keeping community-sensitive information in my safe. Claimed she had probable belief that I was hiding documents related to a developer buyout that would affect property values. That was the twist. She wasn't worried about safety. She was worried about losing control. Apparently, she and a few board members had been meeting with a private real estate consultant behind closed doors. They were trying to quietly push a proposal to rezone part of Silver Creek Estates for higher density housing, and they thought I knew. I didn't, but now I did. And suddenly, everything made sense. The midnight snooping, the sudden interest in my barn, the obsession with the safe. Karen wasn't just nosy. She was covering her tracks. Only one problem. She'd picked the wrong guy to mess with. The legal lines had been crossed, and the hidden intentions were finally coming to light. I didn't need a warrant. I didn't need a badge. I just needed the truth. And it was starting to surface. After the truth started to unravel about the hidden rezoning deal and Karen's backdoor meetings with developers, the atmosphere in Silver Creek Estates shifted dramatically. What was once a quiet, suburban HOA drama had become a full-blown political powder keg. So, in a moment of calculated calm, I did something unexpected. I invited everyone to the barn. Not for another rebellion, not for a community uprising, for a conversation. See, the problem with power, real or perceived, is that it thrives in silence. Rumors grow in the dark. Mistrust multiplies when people stop talking. And that's what the HOA had been banking on, that neighbors would stay uninformed, divided, distracted. I was done playing their game. So, with Clara's help, I turned the barn into a town hall. We swept out the hay, put up string lights, set out folding chairs, brewed fresh coffee, and baked enough cornbread to feed a rodeo. No board, no speeches, no agenda, just an open forum. They came. Almost 70 neighbors filled the barn, standing along the walls, crowding near the old tractor. I stood in front, not in uniform, not with a badge, just as their neighbor and the guy whose safe had accidentally triggered a movement. I invited you here because something's been broken, I said. Trust, transparency, fairness. And it didn't start with Karen breaking into my barn. It started long before that, with decisions made behind closed doors, under the guise of community planning. I didn't name names. I didn't need to. They already knew. Then something unexpected happened. Karen showed up. She stood at the back of the barn, arms crossed, trying to shrink into the wall like a student who hadn't done her homework. People parted around her, giving her space, but not much sympathy. I addressed her directly. Karen, I won't ask you to apologize, but I will ask you to be honest. Why did you really go after that safe? She hesitated. Then, slowly, she stepped forward. Her voice was small. I heard you might have had documents about a deal, a rezoning project. I thought if I could confirm it, the board could move faster. I didn't think about what it looked like or how it felt. There was a long silence. Then Harold from Lot 18 called out, You mean you broke into a man's barn because of a rumor? Someone else added, Why didn't you just ask? Karen's eyes welled up. She wasn't a victim here, and the room made sure she knew it. But even so, the mood wasn't angry. It was tired. Tired of secrets, power plays, and neighbors being treated like enemies. That night, real mediation happened, not with lawyers or policies, but with honesty. We laid it out. The HOA had stepped out of bounds. Karen had crossed the line. And if the board was willing to overstep with me, a police chief, it could do the same to anyone. A resolution started to form. A new oversight group would be proposed, one made up of elected residents, not board-appointed insiders. A motion would be drafted to audit the HOA's financials and meeting minutes from the past 2 years. And finally, the HOA bylaws would be reviewed, this time with a neutral legal consultant present. Karen didn't speak again that night. She left before the last cornbread tray was cleared. But as neighbors lingered, chatting and laughing under the glow of barn lights, something real had been repaired. We'd cleared the air, not perfectly, not fully, but enough to breathe again. And it had started, oddly enough, with a safe. Locked, unassuming, and full of nothing scandalous, just a quiet symbol of boundaries. Boundaries that would never again be so easily ignored. Weeks passed. The tension in Silver Creek Estates began to fade, not because things were perfect, but because people were finally being heard. The safe, once the epicenter of scandal, now sat quietly in my barn, untouched and no longer infamous. The funny part, no one even cared what was in it anymore, which was exactly the point. The safe had never held gold, contracts, or secrets. Just a few antique sidearms passed down from my grandfather, some family documents, and a small box of keepsakes Clara and I collected during our travels. Sentimental stuff, personal stuff, but it had become something more than steel and hinges. It became a stand, a symbol. One Saturday morning, I opened it during the new neighborhood committee's first official meeting, right in the middle of the barn, with half the community watching. "Let's put the mystery to bed," I said. I swung open the door. People leaned in. No gasps, no shock. Just a quiet understanding. Photos, old medals, deeds, a dusty revolver in a velvet-lined holster. Proof that the drama that had nearly fractured our entire neighborhood had been over. Nothing. Karen wasn't there that day. Word was she'd taken a leave from the HOA board, citing personal health and emotional strain. Rumor had it she was considering moving, but I didn't care about punishing her. The lesson had already spread wider than any fine or resignation ever could. Across the neighborhood, homeowners began speaking more openly. The new resident oversight committee got to work, holding monthly meetings, reviewing HOA communications, and making sure nothing like the safe incident could ever happen again. The board itself changed. Ronald Spears quietly stepped down as HOA president within a month, citing business obligations. His replacement, Tasha, the same board member who stood up for common sense during that chaotic meeting in Chapter 3. She had no taste for drama and made it clear her role wasn't to rule the neighborhood, but to protect it. Under her leadership, bylaws were rewritten with clear limitations on inspections and property access. The controversial developer proposal, dead on arrival once exposed to the full community. Turns out no one wanted Silver Creek to become another overbuilt suburb. And the best part? Neighbors became neighbors again. Harold started hosting Sunday barbecues. Martha, from down the road, brought Clara a basket of fresh tomatoes. Even Tom, the clipboard loyalist from the original board, started showing up to meetings without a clipboard. The fear was gone. The silence was gone. In its place was a slow but steady trust. I sat on the porch one night, the safe key hanging on a nail in the barn, the breeze cool and full of crickets. Clara handed me a glass of iced tea and leaned on the railing beside me. "You know," she said, "you could have let them open it, could have avoided all this." I nodded. "Maybe, but if I had, nothing would have changed." She smiled. "Funny what a locked box can teach people." "Yeah, funny." What started as a meddling neighbor's attempt to play watchdog turned into a community-wide awakening. Because while that safe held personal keepsakes, it also ended up holding something else, something bigger, the right to privacy, the line between concern and control, and the reminder that even in a quiet town with picket fences and potlucks, power still needs a check, and the people have to be willing to stand for each other. Not with noise and not with anger, but with truth, clarity, and yes, sometimes with cornbread in a barn. It was late spring when I finally decided to take the lock off the ranch gate. Not because I felt any less protective of my property, or because I had forgiven the trespasses, but because the fight had moved beyond physical gates and into something stronger: mutual respect. The gate stood open now, weathered and wide beneath the Texas sun, but everyone in the neighborhood understood something had changed. The gate may no longer be locked, but the boundaries were clearer than ever: not steel or wire, principles. The community had come a long way since Karen tried to crack open my safe under cover of darkness. Since then, we'd seen resignations, revelations, and real reforms. The HOA had been humbled, the neighbors had been heard, and most importantly, people finally understood that authority, whether you call it HOA or HOA Karen, had limits. It wasn't about rebellion, it was about restoration. That was what Clara and I talked about as we sat on the porch that last Friday evening in May. The smell of grilled meat drifted over from Harold's backyard, where a neighborhood block party was in full swing. Children ran across lawns. Laughter echoed. The place felt like home again. "They're starting to ask what you're gonna do next," Clara said, sipping her lemonade, "now that the dust's settled." "Next?" I looked out toward the barn, where the lights inside glowed soft and warm. "I'm just going to keep doing what I've always done. Protect the peace." She grinned. "And what if peace doesn't want to be protected?" Then I reminded that I'm still the chief. We both laughed, but it wasn't about ego. It was about balance. Truth is, I didn't run for police chief to wave a badge at my neighbors or settle every fence line dispute. I ran because I knew that communities don't thrive under control. They thrive under care, under accountability, under the quiet assurance that someone's watching the line, not from above, but from beside them. The final twist came not long after that. Karen sent a letter. Not a legal threat, not a complaint. A real handwritten letter. She didn't apologize directly, but she acknowledged what she'd done. Said the safe had become an obsession, not because of what might have been inside, but because it represented something she didn't feel: control. In her own strange way, she admitted she was afraid of being powerless in a place she thought she understood. "I thought I was protecting the neighborhood," she wrote. "Turns out I was trying to protect myself from feeling irrelevant. I'm sorry for how I went about it. I hope you can respect the intention, even if the execution was, well, a disaster." I kept the letter, not out of sentimentality, but as a reminder. Even the most stubborn people can learn, if they're willing. The gate still swings open. The barn still stands tall. And the safe? It still holds its little time capsule of memories. But not because I'm hiding anything. Because I can. Because it's my right. And that's the thing this whole saga was really about. Your gate may be metal. Your safe may be wood. Your line may be different from mine. But your rights, they matter. Whether you're a rancher, a teacher, a grandmother on Lot 14, or even the chief of police. So, yeah, the gate is open. But the line? It's drawn. And everyone around here finally knows where it is.